What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video, and back with the last trade video of the season. Many of your trade deadlines have already passed. For many others, it's this week. Because of that, I'm focusing more on players with a very strong playoff strength of schedule, especially for those of you who are either like a lock for playoffs. I don't know. I mean, I guess there's some people who are like a lock right now. If you've got like 8 wins, you're probably making playoffs right now. But even for those of you who are just like looking good, if you think you've got, at least a 60% chance of making the playoffs, you do want to be thinking and prioritizing the playoffs. So we'll start off with like a 1-minute reminder that we are still going after Nico Collins and Mike Evans. Those are the two that we're just flag planting right now as saying they have the best chance. No one's a guarantee to win you a championship, but those two have the best chance to be league winners this season. Nico returned last week, only 4 for 54, 0 touchdowns, but he started off that game. It was like a 75 or 77 yard receiving touchdown. They had the illegal blocking, like 1 extra yard downfield, takes that off the board. Also only played 47% of snaps. So he almost had, over 100, like 130 yards and a touchdown on less than 50% of the snaps. He's a stud rest of season. And he also has a positive playoff schedule, positive strength of schedule. But that week 17, I mean, that's really just what I'm really looking towards as to why he's going to be a league winner at home versus the Ravens. It's like literally the best possible spot you can have as a wide receiver. I think he's going to win someone $1 million. On Underdog, I think he's going to be the player that just like does drop, 120, 130, 2 touchdowns in that week. Then Mike Evans, likely going to return next week is what I'm thinking. Once he does return, he's going to be a weekly wide receiver 1. He's going to have that elite weekly ceiling that we dream of in fantasy. So those two are still the two I'm going after. Who else? Number 3 on my list this week is Jakobi Meyers. We had Brock Bowers go off last week. I think it was like 13 for 125, 126, and a touchdown. Probably don't have to tell you that's not going to happen every week. He's awesome. He's a great player. He's going to have other spike games, but he's not going to have 13 for 126 and a touchdown every week. Myers does have a tough matchup. It's another matchup that does favor Brock Bowers this week against the Broncos, but even counting that for Myers, still has the number 2 remaining strength of schedule for wide receivers, number 1 playoff strength of schedule by a decent margin. He's home versus the Falcons, home versus the Jaguars, at the Saints. The Falcons have the worst pass rush in the NFL. They just allow Bo Nix to throw for 307 yards, 4 touchdowns. The Jaguars, worst pass defense in the NFL in terms of EPA per play allowed. Goff just threw for over 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. And then the Saints are now in the running for the worst pass defense in the NFL with their play recently. They just allowed nearly 400 yards and 2 touchdowns to Jameis Winston. So Myers probably not going to have, 120 a touchdown in all of these games, but he can rip apart any one of those defenses. You can likely get him for flex value. I think from this point on, and especially after this week on, I think he finishes out the season as a top 20 wide receiver in fantasy. My number 4 trade target is Bucky Irving, number 1 rest of season strength of schedule by a mile. So this is especially one, if you're not as much in the bucket of I'm going to make playoffs, I know that I'm looking at my playoff roster, you can still trade for Bucky Irving because he has the number 2 playoff strength of schedule, but number 1 overall, incredible schedule leading up to the fantasy playoffs. So if you're someone who's on that bubble, is like, I need that running back too to really help me, he is someone I would go towards. They shifted towards a 2 running back by committee. That's great to see. Evans returning to the offense soon. That's going to help. And the remaining schedule. We talked about him last week, right? And maybe you were hesitant to trade for him last week because he was on bye last week. But my goodness, you almost cannot dream up a better remaining schedule. Giants, Panthers, Raiders, 1 tough game against the Chargers, then Cowboys and Panthers again. Again, if you didn't trade for him, we talked about him last week, please do so this week. The schedule is insanely positive. He's also been fantastic. And there's a chance he gets the post-bye rookie bump. We typically talk about that more for wide receivers. The data is pretty clear that, especially elite wide receivers, elite rookie prospects in the second half of the season after their bye, you see a very large increase in their production. But even for rookie running backs, it's still like he's been so good leading up to the bye. there's no world where they're like, you know what, let's go away from Bucky Irving. He's been their best early down running back. Then they have the bye. He's a rookie, still developing. Like, everything is trending very positively for him rest of the season. My fifth favorite target is Evan Engram. He is now 6th among all players with over a 30% target share since Christian Kirk got hurt. We talked about this as soon as Kirk got hurt, being like, okay, you remove a very central piece of this offense and a player that when he was out last season, Evan Engram closed the season very, very, very strong. The results, so like the process there and the opportunity is there, right? Over a 30% target share, 6th best among all players for Evan Engram. The results, though, have been poor because the passing offense has been really, really bad. But I think an explosion like has to be coming. There's no way you can end the season with like 6, 7, 8 games in a row of over a 25% target share and not drop a nuke, not have a really good game. I don't care who your quarterback is. Also, now we have Gabe Davis gone. So Christian Kirk, done for the year. Gabe Davis, done for the year. Their pass catchers are now Brian Thomas Jr., who's also an incredible target. If you wanted to target Brian Thomas Jr., you think you get him for decent value. If you just threw him into the flex spot rest of the season, he is going to drop probably 2 nukes rest of the season. He's going to be heavily involved because he has to be. Again, Brian Thomas Jr., Evan Engram, Parker Washington, who I'm higher on than the public, but I still know he's basically just a slot wide receiver that can command, a 13% target share or something like that. Devin Duvernay, who's not good, and Tim Jones. That's their playmakers. So you got Washington, Duvernay, Tim Jones. What are they going to combine for? Maybe, hopefully, a 20% target share. So you got like 80% of targets left, and you're looking at Brian Thomas, Evan Engram, and the running backs, and you're like, okay, well, we're going to have to be feeding you guys a lot. This is on a team with, kind of just mentioned a second ago, like the worst pass defense in the NFL, definitely a bottom 3 pass defense. So you know that team's going to score against them. Like, there's a world where Evan Engram averages a 35% target share rest of season. And there's also a chance they're not getting steamrolled in their games coming up. Like, of course, they got absolutely destroyed by the Lions. That was not a fair matchup. Remaining schedule is bye this week. Then Texans, probably going to get steamrolled by them. But then Titans, Jets, Raiders, Titans. Those last 4, I don't think they're going to lose by 50, right? I think it's going to be remotely close. And so I don't think it's going to be games where the fourth quarter rolls around, they're down by 35, and they bench these guys. I don't think that's going to happen. So I wouldn't factor that in too much. Maybe it happens against the Texans, but let's be honest, the Texans have been good this year, but they haven't shown the same ceiling at times that we would have expected from them. So I still think it's a positive remaining schedule. It grades out as a positive rest of season strength schedule for tight ends, playoff strength schedule for tight ends, and the bye. We're going to talk about that in a second. Use the bye to your advantage. I think with a combination of, I don't think people understand the target share because the pass attempt totals for Jaguars haven't been that amazing. But Mac Jones is not like terrible, right? Like if this was some no-name quarterback that we know for a fact is garbage, it is not going to do anything rest of the season, I'd be a little bit more concerned. I do think Mac Jones is bad, but if in terms of like, there's 32 backup quarterbacks in the NFL, I do think he's probably like a slightly above average backup quarterback. I don't think he's so bad they're going to average like 100 passing yards per game rest of the season. He's going to do something. He's going to have some decent games. I think he's good enough to get the ball to Evan Engram because it's not like Evan Engram's running 50 yards downfield. If he can have a 35% target share rest of the season with decent matchups, I think he has upside rest of the year, and it's at tight end, right? If you're getting a 17% target share at tight end, you're pretty excited about that. So the upside here for 35% is insane. Next favorite target is Amari Cooper. He was pretty limited in his first week back last week, but he looked good, and he played pretty well given the matchup. We always know wide receivers against Kansas City. It's just a difficult matchup. They typically don't perform amazingly. Why I'm excited is we've seen a trend with Buffalo, right? They opened the season, first 6 weeks, very run heavy. They were 20th in pass rate over expectation. There was only one game where they had a positive pass rate over expectation. So they were a run heavy team to start the year. Week 7 on, they're the second most pass heavy team. And not only are they the second most pass heavy team on average, they have 0 weeks from week 7 on, not a single time have they had below a 5.5% increase to pass rate over expectation. So they start the year, every single game besides one is run heavy. Now, every single game is extremely pass heavy. That's obviously a very big positive. Now they have their bye. So that's another positive for Amari, because it's like, well, yeah, you can't use him this week, but again, we'll talk about buys in a second. You can't use him this week, but think about Amari joining this team. He's a wide receiver, changing teams midseason. We always know that's a huge risk, but also it's like he was having the injury. So he's coming off of the wrist injury. That's limiting his snaps. He's new to the team. That's limiting his snaps. He wasn't out there really in the 2-minute drill because, they had to use Matt Collins over him because he just knows the offense a little bit more. You look rest of season, once they come out of their bye, he's going to be fully healthy off of this wrist. He's going to know the playbook a lot more. So those snaps where he's at like 50% of snaps last week, a little under 50% of like a route share. If that goes up to like 80, 90%, just being on the field more in a pass-heavy team with Josh Allen as your quarterback, you're opening up an extremely high ceiling, especially a player of the skill level and of the explosiveness of Amari Cooper. Then you look at the schedule. Again, by this week, versus the 49ers, at the Rams, at the Lions, versus the Patriots, versus the Jets. So you've got a home game in a absolutely massive game. Home versus the 49ers for both of these teams is huge. Like, the Bills want to obviously lock up the number 1 seed. They want to try and take over Kansas City for that top seed. They play significantly better at home. They do not want the AFC Championship game to be at Kansas City. They're going to want to be winning. The 49ers are trying to make the playoffs. So both of these teams, especially Bills coming off bye, both of these teams are going to be firing in that game. That has immense upside. Then you're in a dome the next 2 weeks at the Rams, at the Lions. 2 more very important games. The Rams are in their playoff push, right? The Lions are trying to lock up a number 1 seed. Like, such important 3 games in a row. Then you've got 2 games where you can just steamroll the opponent. You can go into the playoffs with Patriots, Jets, and then 18 we don't care about, but that's also Patriots. You can go into the playoffs steamrolling 3 straight opponents, having a really strong end to the season, and 2 home games in a row for the fantasy semifinals and finals. I just think maybe it doesn't grade out the strength of schedule wise very positively for Amari Cooper, but when you kind of look at how this team is trending very pass heavy, how Cooper is trending, learning the playbook more, getting healthier. When he comes out of the bye in week 13, you've got those 5 matchups in a row to end the season. I'm thinking every week we're going to be wanting to start Amari Cooper, and he's another player. You always want to be targeting players who have a week winning upside. Yes, it's nice when we know a player is probably going to have like 6 for 60 in full PPR, and you're like, nice, we can lock up around, 10 to 15 points. But it's also really nice when you've got a player who's capable of pushing into 120, 130, 140 yards in a game because of how explosive they are, because that can single-handedly win you a week. I don't think he necessarily has that same weekly ceiling that like Nico and Evans have. They're in a tier of their own of like, they could have a performance where it's like, it doesn't even matter what the rest of your team does. They are winning you the week. But Amari is obviously going to be a million times easier to trade for. And please, so we talk about the buys. If you are set for playoffs, you're looking at it and you're like, I have like an 80, 90% chance of making the playoffs right now. Please send offers for these guys on bye. This is a brutal bye week. And a lot of people are also in win now mode right now. So a very difficult combination of not having players, but also needing to win. I can promise you, you can take advantage of that in some way. Falcons, Bills, Bengals, Saints, Jets, and Jaguars. All on bye this week. We already talked about Amari. We talked about Evan Engram. But if there's a player on those teams that you really like, even if you're not necessarily buying low on the player, you can just buy a really good player at this point, because there's a very real chance that multiple, like probably 3 or 4 managers in your leagues are in tough spots this week, are in win now mode, have people on bye. You might be able to offer a clearly lesser player this week because you can't win the championship if you don't make the playoffs, right? So if they're actually in that spot, they might be willing to do that. They might be willing to take on 2 players. Like, there are some people who have like 5 players on bye plus a player on IR, and they're barely fielding a roster this week and they don't want to drop the really good players and they're like, what do I do? They might be willing to take on a player who actually plays this week because they need to win this week if they want to make the playoffs. You never really know what people are willing to do unless you ask. And people know that the playoffs don't matter if you don't make it. So you might be surprised what people are willing to do this week, especially if they have a lot of people on bye. So I think that's the best advice I can give. I would guess in like a 12-team league, 3 or 4 teams are like in actual win now situations. They're hurting with buys. They really need to win. I would take advantage of that. So I've got a few more players you can trade for up on my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. I'll be back tomorrow to go over every single game this week, talk about all the players I'd be starting and sitting. Please leave a like and subscribe if you made it this far, but I'll see you all tomorrow for the rankings video.